Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our live session to wrap up the Applying and Leading Student Affairs and Assessment course that we had that's in partnership with Colorado State University and the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders. My name is Joe Levy. I've been one of the instructors along with the course. We also I'll have my fellow instructor introduce himself.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Ben, also one of the instructors for the course.
All right. And so one of the things that was new this iteration of the course was we wanted to offer some live sessions to try and engage folks in a synchronous way. But even if they couldn't engage synchronously, that we would post the recording in the class as well as make it available for folks outside of the class so that they could know a bit more about the course and see a bit more from the instructor side of things. Know that this is very informal and very free-flowing. Again, we don't have a hard agenda here. We want to give some high-level stats about the course and as well as our reflections as we've been working with each of the modules and interacting with the students. So anybody that's tuning in, we welcome any questions. We welcome comments, feedback. Feel free to do so on the side of the screen here. So yeah, with that, I'll just give some high-level information about the course. We ended up having 1,275 students sign up, which is an amazing number. As the instructors, we're always impressed with the reach this course has and the draw in terms of the number of students. We've run the course 3 times, and all times we've had over 1,000 students, which is just incredible, but also speaks to the need of an interest of people wanting to know more about assessment. And we'll primarily be speaking about each of the sections and our takeaways, both overall as well as interactions that we've seen and comments we got back from people through the discussion boards. And so, what I would say is that we had, always impressed with the types of responses we get during week 1 as people are introducing themselves and sharing about where they're from, as well as their experience or inexperience with assessment and their perspective as they're coming in and what they hope to get out of the course. It's really neat to see that we have people from all over the world looking to take the course, and certainly a large concentration of folks in the U.S. From all types of institutions, and even people who aren't working in higher education but are still interested. And yeah, Ben, I don't know if you have any other takeaways just about the week 1 content or anything on the discussion board that really stood out to you.
Sure. Yeah, some of the similar reflections as you just said, Joe, but I was really impressed by the variety of folks who were not only participating in the course, but interacting across whether it was like kind of department content areas or whether it was different parts of the university, higher ed, outside of higher ed, different locales, different institution types. One particular interest I saw that came up a little bit in Module 1 was faculty members who are also talking about kind of like different assessment ways that happens maybe in the classroom or maybe within academic affairs, and also as connected to student affairs, and seeing some of those conversations take place about, well, are these different processes? What are the similarities? How do we understand how we do assessment in these different content areas, different sides of the universities, which I was hopeful that those kind of conversations were helping to connect, build bridges across maybe some areas that have, in some contexts, been a little more siloed from one another. And so really excited to see some of the variety and diversity in the student body in our course, but also to see those connections being made and shared knowledge as they went through too.
Yeah. And I would add too, one of the things that we know has been going on since the first course iteration, but we also just have tried to gather some information outside of the courses from people and put together some resources around collective utilization of the course. And so we've seen some institutions that have sort of charged their faculty or staff to, as a group, enroll in the course and take it together. And from the past, we know that some folks have done that just in general, as there's a structured professional development opportunity. We invite you to participate and get out of it something to help you with assessment, as well as some very structured and explicit expectations for weekly meetings of, you're going to go through week 1 of the course, and then we're going to meet and talk about it and talk about applying it at our institution, or hear what you're taking away from it. And we've seen that across divisions. We've seen it across specific offices and areas. And so that was one other thing that, especially when you look across all the over the 600 responses within that first discussion board, you can start to see the number of people that are coming from the same institution, and it's helpful to, I always try to point out, like, oh, I hope you are aware that so and so from your institution is there, and that they are participating in this course, and you should reach out and look to engage with them. But oftentimes there were people that then would respond back and say, yeah, we know, like, we're taking it as a group, or our director encouraged us. So very exciting to see that happening. And yeah, it's been incredible to see that, and it's always energizing for us to see that at the beginning of the course, but then also, because it is an open course, to see folks even joining and engaging in week 7 and week 8, and even going into that first module and introducing themselves and looking to engage. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. And I see there's a comment there from Stephen. Thanks for tuning in, Stephen. We appreciate you. And oh yeah, the personalized the videos. Absolutely, that's one of the things that we always encourage, and we put the instructions in there on the discussion board for people to record a video themselves. And not a lot of people do, but it is refreshing as instructors to see that, because otherwise we only get to know you through what you write. You obviously get to know us through our videos and seeing us and hearing our voice. So it is refreshing to hear from you all. But we also don't put a lot of pressure there in case folks don't want to do that. But it is great, and I'm glad you appreciated the response back. So if we could, we'll look to turn our attention now, and we're just going to work through the course. And so we'll turn our attention to Module 2. And Emily is not here to join us and kind of speak on behalf of that module, because I know that was the week that she looked to really engage on the discussion boards with everyone. And so I'll turn it over to Ben in a moment to just share some feedback that Emily had passed on to us about the discussion board. But the one thing that is pretty interesting about week 2 is, just to tee Ben up a little bit, is that it's the first time that we introduce this idea of offering students the ability to engage on the discussion boards by institutional type. And so, without trying to confuse anybody, we put the information out there of, here's how to sign up to these groups within the course that are completely open, and anyone could join them, and you don't only have to be a part of one group. But we recognize that from the past, folks have given us feedback that sometimes the discussion boards are overwhelming. With over 600 posts, it's easy to get lost in that, or try and sort through it for information that pertains to you or your area. So we experimented with this last section, and we kept it this time because it had a good reception then. But we identified some of the discussion boards that could benefit from having folks engage on the topic with others in their function, with others in their same institutional type. And so we had community colleges as areas for both over 10,000 students as well as under. We had private 4-year institutions over and under 10,000, and public 4-year institutions over and under 10,000. And we continue to see that one, folks certainly appreciate that and then engage and can talk a little more specifically about the nature of their school and that environment and how the concepts apply there. But also, um, we see some people who maybe benefit from popping into those other groups, and maybe they're not at a community college, but they want to see how the conversation around assessment planning, for example, might be different at a community college. But this was the first time that is introduced in the course, and it occurs to keep things simple. We have it on the even numbered modules, with the exception of module 8. But modules 2, 4, and 6 have that same setup. And we've gotten some good feedback about it, but we also see a number of folks who either choose not to engage that way, or maybe didn't catch the instructions of joining those individual groups, and so they just post in the general area. But we hope to continue that, as well as think of other ways to connect people and help make the discussion boards a bit more personable or applicable beyond just being a sea of responses. We'll turn it over to Ben to share some of Emily's feedback here on Module 2.
Awesome. So Emily gave us a few notes that she was observing during her time in the discussion board on Module 2. So a little bit of history here behind this module. In prior iterations of the course, Emily had just really realized that most folks were talking about the first steps and the last steps of the assessment process as being the most challenging parts of the assessment process. So she specifically created, and you probably saw this, a personal take video about that, about like addressing like, hey, here's kind of some things that people have said in the past, as a way to kind of serve as a bit of a primer for that discussion. She was interested in seeing that, I don't know if it was consequently or just happened, that there are different challenges among the folks who participated in the discussion board that they identified in that assessment cycle, but folks were more talking about the middle parts of the assessment cycle between the two major themes that she had identified in prior course iterations. So it was really interesting. I think it's some reflections on, was there a connection between that new video and how students were engaging with the other steps of the cycle? Was it just that there was a different population of students who were looking at and had different challenges with the assessment cycle? And it brings to mind some questions about how do we offer content through this course that allows, translate to a lot of different groups of students, regardless of where their experiences and challenges in that process. So really interesting to kind of think about, and she's reflecting on that. I think that's a lot of the notes that she gave here. Yeah. Yeah, as Joe said, if you all have any feedback on that, kind of separated out discussion board format, that'd be awesome. Whether you're watching right now or even later, if you come back and return to this, please drop us a line. That'd be great, because that was a theme that we were kind of working through several of the modules, as Joe said. So yeah, I think that's what Emily kind of reflected on as far as Module 2 goes. And also that'll connect a little bit to some of the reflections I have later too about folks' experience with the assessment. So we're going to draw some connections there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And it's also interesting to situate the responses folks have during week 2 about assessment planning, and then, to your point, how they incorporate or reference that later in the course, as well as especially it being week 8 of the course, seeing people as they're talking about the big takeaways they have, them mentioning how the course, that elements of the planning, in module 2 are really sticking with them, or those are some of the things they're going to take back. So it's also this interesting balance of we're seeing content and how people are reacting in the moment during the given module, but then also seeing how maybe their knowledge progresses or potentially changes as they're putting these other pieces of the assessment puzzle together here towards the end. But I'll move on to talk about Module 3, which was my module, and it's really centering around this consulting and giving guidance in the assessment process, because that's certainly a big responsibility of assessment folks, of not just doing work and doing reports, but guiding and motivating others to be involved and leading the efforts for their area. It's somewhat similar to Emily, have been using feedback from people in the past and students in the past to shape and try and improve the discussion board. One of the things in the past, I had modified the prompt a little bit this year, because in the past when we presented this prompt about a new student orientation director who's running this course for orientation leaders, we listed out the learning outcomes and said they were looking to measure this at the end of the course, and then asked, how would you approach the situation as, in terms of looking to consult with them. And in the past, a lot of people really got hung up on the learning outcomes and really almost stopped there, in terms of thinking about the broad aspect of consulting and knowing that there's some aspects of building a relationship, knowing that you need to understand their area, situate yourself in terms of what you can offer them in terms of support with assessment. And then, yes, actually looking at the nature of their learning outcomes, their assessment plan, their approach. And so one of the things that I had done this time around was included some more specific prompts and questions for people to respond to, as well as downplayed a little bit the nature of the learning outcomes in the scenario. And so what's been interesting of that surprised me is that then there were a number of people when they posted that didn't mention the learning outcomes at all, and just assumed that they were what they were and that this is what was happening. And so here's what their approach was going to be in working with this director, given their assessment approach. And so that was then a thing that I would challenge the students on as well. I appreciate your approach in terms of the relationship aspect and what to do with the data they're going to collect, but how would you address or look to offer feedback to them about the nature of their outcomes, because they might not be written the best, or they might need there might be other aspects about an orientation leader that are important to capture. Likewise, an end of course survey might not be the best solitary measure of these learning outcomes. So similar to Emily's feedback with Module 2, I wonder to what extent my adjustment of the prompt might have skewed people's responses. So it'll be something I think about as we think about the next iteration of the course in terms of whether to shift back to maybe what the prompt was before, or find maybe a hybrid of maybe I swung too far the other way, and knowing that people really got hung up on the learning outcomes last time. But yeah, what I appreciated at least is there was a much more breadth to the responses with this term than last term, and so I do think the adjustment helped with that, as well as folks did appreciate the additional personal take video that was new this year, talking about how this can be put to use, so that it wasn't just all theoretical or aspirational from the video perspective. Okay, and so then Module 4 was Ben, so I'll turn it over to you to talk about how that went.
That's right. Thanks, Joe. So Module 4 was the module that, since at least from last course, it was kind of reworked the most here. So it was a little bit more streamlined to specifically focus on mission and vision statement building in the connection to how do we understand our assessment projects and goals in the context of institutional priorities. So that was a focus that culminated in the discussion board as build a mission statement or build a vision statement through a certain prompt that you saw on the discussion boards. I thought it was super interesting to see that in that conversation, there were a variety of folks who had either done that kind of activity in their context recently, or they were about to do it, or saw kind of a need to do that kind of activity in their context. And so a common theme in the conversation was how, I think, relevant and applied that activity was within the context of the workplace where our students were at the time, which is kind of an ideal situation for us. I mean, ultimately, we want to know that we can offer some theoretical concepts, but ultimately things that can be applied in context to further and improve assessment processes. I think the conversation itself was a very different one then, because it varied from here's kind of what we came up with after this process in our context, whether that was here's that mission statement that we built together, versus we're not really sure how to define this, and here's kind of how I'm experimenting with just making a little bit of headway in this area. So I thought the conversation was really unique in that it bounced back and forth a little bit. I think there were some interesting insights, especially there were a couple of posts from folks who were assessment oriented folks, but who worked in an office of one. They were the only person in their assessment office. So they were kind of building mission statements that were technically their office's mission statement, but it was also kind of their personal mission statement as well in the context of their work. It got me thinking a lot about how do I approach my work with a mission statement of my own? How does that fit into my organization that I work in? Is there a difference between kind of a personal mission statement that I can bring to my work versus the kind of like what that looks like when I'm working in an organization, another team? So that I think was also another interesting point of discussion. The couple posts where it was about somebody who was a single person in their assessment office had this really great way of being able to connect what their strengths were as a worker in that organization to their own personal / office mission statement that I think really helped when they were thinking about consulting or building that relationship with other folks around the university. So really neat to see very varied responses in a number of ways. One thing I was thinking about, and also welcome feedback on this, is like as discussion board conversations, sometimes it was the process of responding and developing conversation around those mission statements would happen in some areas. Other areas it was like, okay, we would just kind of post and move forward. So if you all have any ideas of how do we kind of come together and think about using each other as soundboards for mission statements, vision statements, and continuing that conversation through the discussion board. Some other folks later in the course kind of suggested maybe pairing up or having a specific partner who you would exchange ideas with. I was reminded, I guess reflecting in Module 4, that it probably would have helped to have further conversation, even if it was just one or two people, to really help refine those ideas behind mission and vision statements, which are such an important part of alignment in our assessment projects, but sometimes can be, if you develop them in kind of an insular environment, sometimes it's hard to see exactly the areas that could be improved. And that's maybe the benefit of the course where there's so many different people here. So anyway, this is just kind of thinking about improvements moving forward, but fostering that discussion was one main idea I was thinking about in Module 4 too. Overall, really interesting. I think most folks were focused more on the mission statement as opposed to the vision statement, but definitely something that was pretty cool. Okay, it looks like we have a question, right? Okay, it was Stephen, and it was interesting for me to create the mission statement for my department versus the Institute as a whole and admissions, and how that statement connected throughout the Institute. Awesome. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for kind of connecting your experience there too. And Cynthia, I see you've got an idea about discussion too. So pairing up, maybe even creating smaller groups of 5 to 10. Still something that would encourage more back and forth. If I knew a few people were waiting on me to respond, I'd be more inclined to get involved. Great feedback. That's definitely something that I think we're thinking about, and was part of why we were considering this idea of splitting up by institution type. But it sounds like it might be even more helpful, beneficial to go even smaller in size, so that there is a specific smaller group that has that conversation. Thanks so much, Cynthia and Stephen, for the feedback here.
Yeah, and it's been interesting, and as instructors, we've gone back and forth. I think what's really helpful is hearing that feedback from the students in this course louder and more clearly than before, because we've thought in the past, because admittedly the course is pretty light when it comes to assignments and things that are required of the student. And because of that, and knowing the nature of the course, having done it 3 times, we've seen a number of people that sign up because they know it's a resource, but never quite engage. And given the way the course is structured, unless we intentionally pick people, which could be very difficult to do with almost 1,300 students, and we'd be completely random if we even tried that. We worried about setting up the course in a way that would automatically chunk people together in groups. Because what if you got Cynthia? What if you got chunked with a group of people that never logged in, right? Then it'd be a pretty poor experience for you because you're not getting feedback from these people that you're assigned to. However, to your point, maybe if people knew that was an expectation or that was part of the course, that maybe they would engage, or maybe they'd at least see who they're signed up with. Or worst case scenario, if you see that your group isn't responding to you, maybe then that's you doing that outreach to other people, which is basically what we're asking people to do at this point. And so we've thought about some of that stuff in the past before, but we hadn't necessarily gotten as much direct feedback like we have been doing this year. So I think that's certainly something for us to put at the top of the list of our roadmap, and thinking of how can we better facilitate connections, collaborations, and small group conversation, reflection, pairing on projects to make it a better experience for the students, as well as potentially even that might help bump the student engagement as well. Yeah, so certainly appreciate that. I want to. Oh, and I see Stephen noted. We had to comment on 2 posts. Yeah, but we've thought about adjusting the requirements around the discussion board in terms of requiring a certain number of responses. Absolutely. Just to give some bigger picture historical context, the whole course was born out of the idea of creating resources for people in relation to assessment and making it free. And so we very much from the beginning approached this course as a resource. However, as we've been moving along, we've been seeing not only our inclination and what we want to do with the course, as well as hearing from the students that, let's respect that this is a course and that there are responsibilities of a student in a course, and that we want to do more in the course. So that's been refreshing for us to hear from the students, but also I guess some of the permission we needed ourselves to think about how we could step up some of the components in terms of the requirements of the course or assignments or expectations of the students, because it has been a bit of a philosophical shift for us, because the whole thing was put together with the intent of we just want to get resources out there to people, and we can facilitate it in this course. But we've really advanced along to this point of knowing that this goes well beyond just resources, and that we have an excellent opportunity to engage folks and cultivate that support and feedback. So really appreciate your all's thoughts here. Shifting to Module 5, this is one that I have, and I continue to struggle a little bit with this one because it covers a lot. It is a packed module exploring a number of concepts that at the surface do not seem related at all. But there was a method to our madness in putting it together. Starting with the high level, making sure as we're talking about assessment that we're talking about the same thing. And I even was just commenting to some people in the week 8 discussion board, as some folks were talking about applying things, taking back to their campus, and how they want to collaborate with their institutional research team, and how in doing their assessment, they know that they're going to have to fill out IRBs for that activity, which to me that signals that maybe assessment at that institution is treated a little more like research, in that they would have to sort of go through those protocols. And so this module really starts at the top of explaining that there are people who treat assessment, evaluation, and research very differently. There are people that treat them the same. There are people that treat them as one or the other. And so it's always just important to know what we're talking about and to know what some of the literature says about defining these areas. And then once we are looking to do this work, knowing that just like we need to be on the same page in terms of definitions and understanding, we need to take a step back and look at our mental models and our positionality in a situation to know, well, what am I bringing to the table? What assumptions do I have? What bias do I have when I approach a situation or something's presented with me? What decisions have already been made in my head? And being self-aware of that, and then where there are blind spots or limitations, or where perhaps you're too close to something, or that you have had a bad experience in the past, and so that's going to color your reaction or perspective to something, that you do something about it, and that you involve other people, and that you help to guard against that, or take a step back and somewhat put those feelings aside and try to be objective with what's going on. Or you can't always fight emotions or the influence they have on you, or even your mental model and your approach, but just recognizing what it is, so that as you're trying to work through that and even do the assessment work, that you are trying to be as holistic, comprehensive, and as possible in order to have the best outcome. So we talked through that mental model piece, mitigating bias and strategies for doing that. And then we sort of step back from the heady level pieces and get back into the practical application of, so if we're doing assessment, then how are we sharing this out, and how are we looking to communicate this information? And so we talked through some strategies around that, layering in some of the mental models and bias pieces and how those can play a factor here. But knowing that sharing assessment results and communicating information, there's strategy to that. It's not just emailing a spreadsheet, or it's not just posting, a multi-page report. You have to think about your audience. You have to think about their needs. You have to think about the message you're trying to communicate, and also having a strategy and planning for that. Because I think that's a big downfall with communication and sharing in general, is that people don't plan to take the time to do it, and so they get their results, they do their report, and then they're off to the next thing. And they didn't factor in the time to develop a strategy, or share the information, or set a meeting with other stakeholders before a decision needs to be made. So all those pieces, believe it or not, are all in this one module 5. And so as you can imagine, on the discussion board, it was a bit of a challenge to think of, well, how best do we want to tackle all of these different things? And I think we had a good approach this time without overwhelming people with too many questions, although I would say that responses dipped a little bit this week compared to some other weeks. I think this is one of the first somewhat intimidating weeks of asking a lot of heady concepts, and as well as even some vulnerable, having students show some vulnerability in terms of bias elements and how they view situations that could be disclosing things that has been more personal than some of the content so far. But I was really impressed with what people shared, and the amount of detail and depth that they were willing to provide in the discussion board. I think that because there were a number of questions posed, I think we were trying to differentiate and show how some of these concepts are unique, but I think also that it was asking a lot in terms of all the pieces to post, and certainly students were self-selecting, like, well, I'll respond to this one, or I'll respond to these 2 things, because that's, for me, the things that I took away. So we might try and think about how that discussion could be better facilitated, or like we've talked about before, how maybe we could assign certain pieces for self-reflection versus talking about with another student, or talking about in a group. Um, but yeah, it's the nice thing about having all this different content in Module 5 is that then it provides a rich experience as an instructor to see what people are taking away, what resonates with them, as well as what's maybe the newer concept versus um, something that is more familiar with them.
So I had module 6 then, as we kind of make our way through the course, and this was a brand new discussion board because in prior courses this was kind of an open forum to basically say, hey, do you have any additional questions for this module? Do you have like particular areas that you'd like more information? And because of that openness, it wasn't necessarily a discussion board that was had a singular theme or was really specific to an area, or even was we had specific ideas around not making that kind of a mandatory discussion board. We shifted that approach this time, saying that, hey, this idea of making decisions based on data is really something that is an applicable thing that we should talk about, that all of us should really have this interesting discussion about. And we turned it, I think, in a way to ask for examples in your experience of ways that you've either used data to make decisions or have seen opportunities to use data to make decisions, that maybe you could share about whether you actually use data in that situation or not, or other situations. It was really interesting to me, and I was blown away by the responses in this module because most folks were sharing times where they had done this really, really well. And so, and that sounds bad when I say it that way. The idea I'm trying to say is that we were expecting, like, okay, here's an area that maybe we could have used data in this way, and then maybe moving forward we would use that, as opposed to that. And that certainly did happen in a couple posts, but as opposed to that, most people were saying, here's an area where we really knocked it out of the park. Like we collected data on this area. We specifically connected it to our policies in this area of our organization. We collaborated with another group across campus. We fostered community building, connections between students, all of these really, really amazing things. I mean, most of my experience as an instructor working through this was just like, wow, like, let me take some notes on what you all did because this was so impressive in that. And so I think it also helped me put into context, some of our content is kind of, by the nature of this course, focused a little bit more on introducing some of these foundational concepts, especially module 6, in the sense that there's so much that you can do in terms of working with data, using it in decision making. And as many of you have commented later, some of these comments came up in the Module 8 discussion board, some in the Module 6 discussion board. There's a lot more there, right? There's so much. We covered frequency tables, like that is a very, very, very small intro to using data in your work and assessment. Yet, and probably the experience of many of you, is that there's so much data work that comes in that assessment process. And so as I'm thinking about ways to improve, especially that module, I'm thinking about, like, how do we get additional resources to introduce the whole host of ideas behind the data work, data analysis, data cleaning, and not only from a quantitative nature, but that module had a little bit more of a quantitative bent. And I was just overwhelmingly impressed by these things. There was one example of someone saying they were interested in how female identifying students at a STEM school that was predominantly male identifying students, how they were connecting with one another, or how they could support those students in particular in that context, finding out that they wanted more connections with other female identifying students. And so they were building this group after that survey, and they were facilitating connections between students, which helped them have kind of an increased sense of belonging. And that's just like, that's awesome. That's kind of the ideal situation of how do we use data to improve or to at least inform our decision making. So lots of really positive reflections on that. I think in general, I'm thinking about how do we cater some of our discussion boards to really take advantage of the experience that you all bring to the table in the context of the MOOC. So those were some large themes from Module 6. I think I covered everything in my notes. Yeah. It was really enjoyable, I think, in general.
Great. So I'll take module 7 here to on behalf of Emily and share some feedback there. So module 7 was a pretty big module in terms of one, helping bring some of this content together in talking about a culture of assessment, but also this was also the module that we've been prepping students along the way and reminding them to do their interview and reflect on the interview that we asked them to do outside of the course and building up until this point. You know, the one note around this piece is, while a lot of people resonated with the culture that was shared and the 4 Cs, and a lot of people really liked that. You know, it was important for us, and Emily did the little personal take video to reiterate that this is one culture, right? This is one framework and approach to coordinating assessment activity. It obviously resonates with people and it's helpful, but know that not everyone has to do that. So if you were watching the video or looking at the content and thought, I don't think this is going to work at my institution, then it's something that's okay. And that, you know, we made sure to add in some additional resources, and we made sure to incorporate some other examples so that folks don't feel like the only thing they had was the 4 Cs model. But you know, the good thing about the 4 Cs is a lot of people appreciate it, resonates with them both. You know, they talk about that in the model as well as they talk about it in week 8. But we wanted to be sure not to alienate anyone who maybe didn't ascribe to that or didn't think it was perhaps the best fit. And so I think that was a nice addition that we had, and an intentional thing we did leading up to this iteration of the course. But then the other big thing, the discussion of folks sharing their the interviews that they had. I think one, certainly a lot of rich information shared, and it looks like folks got some great affirmation, learned things from the people they interviewed, gained confidence in understanding that the work they're doing is not that unfamiliar, or that they're not too far behind other people doing assessment work. So it looked like people really gained a lot from those interviews. I think, given some of the feedback we've heard, as well as how we've navigated this piece of the course so far, I think we have an opportunity to do something more with the interview section. I think we can potentially pose it as an assignment that people sort of separately document and submit, so that they're not having to balance too much of sharing information about it in order to reflect on it. Likewise, we see opportunity to have people share one another in a smaller group, or about what makes sense and how they could make the feedback from the interview actionable, or potentially even pair people up to interview one another and have an additional perspective beyond the individual they selected for their interview. So we recognize those are some opportunities for us to expand on this part of the course, but at least given the feedback and the participation from folks, it seemed to be helpful in what they were looking to do and what they did and their ability to reflect on it. But yeah, the one thing that we continue to just try and guard against, even though people are really happy with the 4C model, is we want to remind them there are other models out there. It's a little bit like Bloom's taxonomy for learning outcomes. Some people feel like that is the Bible of learning outcomes, but there are other taxonomies out there. There are other approaches to writing learning outcomes than using Bloom's. And so I think this is one of those instances of, we want to make sure that even though people might appreciate the 4C model, it's great, but know there are other models out there. And so that then the people who maybe don't connect with that model don't feel like that, they're an outlier, or that's the only way for them. So yeah, that was module 7. I'll turn it over to Ben to cover module 8, and I'll chime in too, because it's our kind of culminating piece here.
Sounds great. So yeah, Also, to your point, Stephen, that previously about kind of requiring the idea of responses in discussion board, this is the module where I think the only module, maybe correct me, Joe, if I'm wrong on that, but I think this is the only module where we did say kind of specifically here, responded to posts here in the discussion. And so in that way, and thanks for bringing that up, Stephen, I think that's an interesting example for us to consider moving forward as well, because there were probably a lot more interaction, I think, from students talking to one another about takeaways, sharing, similar takeaways, these kind of things too. So this is something that I think it was really interesting to see the conversation, but also some similarities. So Joe just talked a lot about the 4Cs. That was a common theme throughout the module reflections on biggest takeaways. 4Cs were kind of a really important thing that people talked about. Hey, this was a great thing to include in the course, and we're thankful for that. One of the reflective questions was, how can you collaborate, moving forward with folks? And I thought there were some really great, intriguing ways that people were talking about. I want to collaborate with IR or a different organization across the university or a different office. Some students had already said, hey, I've already done this. Like, I already set up a meeting with somebody. And so I think that was really neat as an instructor to see, okay, students are not just, compartmentalizing the MOOC as this is when I go to learn about assessment, but seeing how these things apply in their day-to-day, and being able to then reach out to other folks around the university and make those connections happen, facilitate those conversations. That's really awesome. I think some other reflections is recognizing that some of these ideas might have been more salient to some more than others. And so that was also cool to see the different context specific. And this module 8 was not split up by institution type. So there was more kind of conversation around that as well. Some folks who felt like they had more ability to kind of change the trajectory of their assessment processes and projects than others. But ultimately, I think a pretty well-rounded conversation about that, and good takeaways in general.
Yeah, it's really, I think for us, it's exciting. Module 8's exciting in a number of ways. I think one, we just for our own workload's sake, we divide up a lot of the modules other than module 1 and module 8. Those are the 2 times we all come together. And so I know it's personally exciting to be on the module and seeing Ben and Emily responding to things. And for students to be able to benefit from multiple of our perspectives, all on one board, as well as it's exciting for us to see, as I mentioned way back with talking about module 2, to see how students maybe were identifying and reflecting on information at the time, and to see how then that perspective might change by the end of the course when they're taking a step back and thinking about all the things and how they all fit together, what makes sense to them, what really resonates with them, where they also need to dig in a little bit, and go back and acknowledge, I got the idea of that, but and so this, I think a couple examples are some of the times where we ask students to identify or articulate things, and so this could be with Ben's module 4 of the vision and mission statements. People might realize, I should really go back and do that more intentionally with my office or with my area, beyond just this academic exercise, as well as some folks who are saying, yeah, differentiating assessment, evaluation, and research, I get it, or I have my lens of how I treat those things, but I need to look more into what my institution thinks and what that might look like at my institution, and how that could impact policy, procedure, or even people's potential view or apprehension or excitement about assessment work, making sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So yeah, it's module 8's fun just for us because we know it's coming to the end of the course, but everything really starts to come together. It's also a great place that we get some great feedback, where people talk about not only as they share about things they could better understand. There's also some good notes of I had trouble connecting with this video, or in this one module, this concept was presented in a way that I didn't quite understand. And so that's great feedback for us to take in, and certainly different feedback than somebody acknowledging, this was great information. I just know I need to spend more time with it given my work. However, I would also say it's no substitute for participating in the end of course survey and giving your feedback there. We certainly value that information and look forward to folks doing that. And just to make sure you get there when you're in the last module and are participating in the discussion boards, if you just keep clicking the next button, it'll eventually take you to that survey. So we highly encourage folks to fill that out and look forward to the feedback then, because as we've shared along the way, and we're intentional in sharing what things are new to this course, because all of those ideas came from previous students. They all came from feedback and information that students had shared and asked questions about in the past. So we've already noted how some of the great feedback here is, you helpful in connecting with us and things we've already had, as well as we're already making the list of things to change or look to improve for the next course offering. But we encourage more of that on the discussion boards as well as through that survey, and individually too. I mean, I think that's the other thing that we don't explicitly always share, but all of us instructors are welcome for the feedback, either within the Canvas module through its emailing system, or even outside of that, you're sharing and connect with us. I just saw there was a person who just posted today. They made a LinkedIn post, so they connect with me on LinkedIn, sharing that they were excited to be taking the course and wanted to stay in touch. And then I saw that they just finished the course as of yesterday, and they got their certificate, their statement of achievement. And they wrote a LinkedIn post, a little article about celebrating their achievement and finishing the course, and they posted their statement, and they really talked up then their takeaways. So it was a beefed up version of the Module 8 discussion board, but they walked through the things they really gained from it, as well as it was a great demonstration of them proving that they're taking that, taking the positive experience they have with the course and telling other people about it. So I was really excited to see that. And this morning I was going to make sure and share it around with the other instructors so they see that as well. But yeah, the more we're happy for engagement, we're happy for constructive feedback, again, to improve the course, as well as positive feedback, or even just ideas of, would have been great to have this type of resource, or maybe now we could do this. And so again, all of the feedback folks have been providing is great, as well as the comments people have shared. And we encourage you to continue to give us that feedback well after this live session, well after the course. Certainly appreciate that. Any other? Yeah, I was just gonna say, anything.
Yeah, just to add on to what you're saying, Joe, I super excited for any feedback that you all provide, and specifically an area that is new to this iteration of the course was that you had access to all the modules immediately on day one. And so I'd be really interested in knowing kind of how that worked for you all, how kind of that maybe shifted your approach. Of course, if this was your first time taking it, then that is a hard comparison to make, how you would have approached it versus how you did. But that is interesting. It kind of shifted some of our discussion boards a little bit, in that the folks who were going through a little faster were the ones who were also setting the tone for some of the discussions as well. So I'd be interested in hearing your reflections and any feedback you have on that as we kind of move forward as well. That was the only thing I had to add on, Joe. I thought that was really great.
Yeah, and that is something that I'll just reiterate as well, is we thought it. There were certainly good times and bad times when the trailblazers on the discussion boards went first, because I think sometimes people look to them as the example of how to respond to the post. And so, like, one of the bad times is, because it's a rolling course, we felt bad for the people who, once one person said, "Sorry, I'm late to the course," then it seemed like everybody after them just would instantly apologize. And so I felt like I kept telling them, don't be sorry. We know you're busy. That's why we designed this course, to be open, to be self-paced. So yeah, we've been really reflecting on that this time around more than the previous, of what we can be doing with the discussion boards to potentially model a response, or also just try and get the best engagement from the students. And I think some of these other ideas around pairing up, could also be helpful in mitigating any of that going on, and just being more intentional with the interactions, what we're asking of students. But yeah, I mean, we've been super excited. This is the third time we've run the course, and it's different every time with the new students, as well as we keep making changes. So it's always exciting and fun. And I personally, and I don't want to speak on behalf of all the instructors, but I've also liked these opportunities and even the idea of these live sessions, because I think it adds this other dimension to the work, and offers at least an opportunity for synchronous connection, as well as just, again, we had gotten a lot of feedback last time about more personalized videos, more personal takes and reflection of the content, and making it more concrete. And so I think, if nothing else, even if people don't interact with these sessions live, because maybe they can't given their schedule, that it's at least recorded and provided so that people can engage with it and have some more of that personalized interaction with the instructors. Any closing well, so I'd say with our final minutes here, happy for any additional questions that people may have. But as we wait for any of those, any final closing thoughts or comments, Ben?
I think just maybe one of gratitude, in that we're so thankful for your participation in this course. For those of you who are currently kind of watching this live session, and anyone who's also viewing this later on after this is finished. And yeah, excited that we had a really great conversation all throughout the course. Looking forward to continuing that conversation in the future. I think it was exciting, and I think we've covered everything that I was thinking about, Joe.
All right, great. And I see your note, Cynthia. Thank you for completing the survey. Much appreciated. Yeah, and just to talk about next steps, this is a partnership between Colorado State and the Student Affairs Assessment Leadership Group. And we, after every course, we partner with them and reflect with them about how the course went and talk about future offerings. This is the third time we've done it, and both parties continue to be happy. And I know we have plans to do it again, but sometimes it's a logistical element of thinking through, well, how and when are we going to do it again? So unfortunately, we don't have for you hard information about when the next course will be, but feel free to connect with us, or stay in touch with Saul, or make sure to keep an eye on CSU's website, because we'll certainly, once we know more information, be sharing it out and looking to promote that for the next iteration, where if you took it this time, you can still take it again, see what's different, or if you want another run through and see what additional resources might be, or if you have colleagues that you want to recommend the course, we certainly appreciate that. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't have those immediate details ready to announce or share with you all today, but stay tuned. However you found out about the course this time around, hopefully through one of those mediums or channels, you'll be able to find out next time. But we certainly thank you all, as Ben said, for engaging with the course, being part of the course, and helping give us feedback to make it better for future students. And we wish you well with your assessment endeavors, and hope that we've been able to help in some way. But thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your spring, and yeah, maybe see you next time. All right. Have a good day, everyone.